欢迎大家每天都收听客家讲了 Me 这个 podcast 节目，只要几分钟就可以认识台湾客家文化。Now, when you think of Hakka culture, you probably think of places like Taiwan or southern China, right? Well, today we're going to go way, way off that map. We're headed to a small Indonesian island where a really unique Hakka story was forged in the heat of tin mines. This is the story of Bunka Island.
So let's dive in. Welcome to Banka Island. You've probably never heard of it, and that's okay. But for centuries, this little island was a whole world away from home for tens of thousands of Hakka people, and it became a place where their culture didn't just hang on by a thread, it was completely reborn. Okay, picture this. An island in Indonesia that's dotted with over 1,000 Chinese temples. A place where festivals like Chinese New Year are celebrated with this incredible energy and passion. Well, that place is totally real, and its name is Bunka. And here's where it gets really wild. If you look at the population numbers, they're just staggering. People of Chinese descent make up more than a third of the whole province. And in the main city, Pinang, it's over 40%. And guess what? The huge majority of them are Hakka. So that brings us to the big question, right? How on earth did this happen? What brought so many Hakka people to this one specific island? And how did their culture manage to put down such deep, unshakable roots so incredibly far from home? Well, the answer, like with so many of these big migration stories, really comes down to one thing. It all starts with a metal, a resource that, for a time, basically powered the modern world: tin. See, tin was found on Banka way back around 1710. By the 18th century, the Dutch were running the show, and they were desperate for workers to do the absolutely grueling work in the mines. So they looked to southeastern China, to these famously tough and resilient workers. And that just kicked off this massive wave of migration in the late 1800s. But we have to be really clear about something. This was not some simple, happy story of people moving for a better life. The system that brought them here was so unbelievably harsh, it earned this really chilling nickname, Mai Zhuzai, which means selling piglets. For most of these guys, this was not a journey of choice. It was a debt trap. They were tricked with promises of getting rich, but then brokers would take almost all their wages, making it literally impossible to ever buy a ticket back home. They weren't just migrants. They were stranded. But, and this is where the story takes an incredible turn, this tale of exploitation becomes one of amazing resilience. Because once they were trapped on this island, these workers didn't just give up. They built a whole new world, right from the ground up. They started building settlements near the mines, and these places grew into the island's major towns. They became known as the 8 Ports, and they were the absolute heartland of Hakka life on Banka, a real network of communities that looked out for each other. And they blended into the local culture in a really personal way. I mean, think about it. Almost all the miners were men, so many of them ended up marrying local Malay women. This created these unique, blended families and this amazing culture of harmony that you can still hear today in a local saying, Chinese and locals are all one family. And to keep their heritage alive, they built all the crucial stuff a community needs. They built these Chinese halls, or Zhonghua Huiguan. And these weren't just buildings, they were everything. They were schools, they were community centers, even political hubs. It was all about making sure their culture got passed down. But their journey was far from over. The 20th century, well, it threw everything at them. You had a civil war back in China, and then major oppression right there in Indonesia. It was a century that would test their identity and their will to survive. After World War II, the massive civil war happening back in China actually split the community on Banka right in two. Suddenly people had to choose a side, the Republic of China or the new People's Republic of China. And this wasn't some distant debate. It caused these deep, painful splits inside families, businesses, even the schools they had built together. And their path to actually belonging in Indonesia, it was an incredibly long one. These 2 documents tell a powerful story. On the left is a passport from 1916. It belonged to the grandfather of a writer from the island. Now, his family had lived on Banka for generations. But it wasn't until 1980, you can see the document on the right, that his father was finally able to become an official Indonesian citizen. Generations. The absolute darkest period came under the Suharto regime, starting in the late 1960s. the government rolled out these really harsh policies to force them to assimilate. Chinese schools were shut down, the language was banned, and people were even forced to give up their Chinese family names and take on Indonesian-sounding ones. It was a systematic attempt to just sever them from their heritage.
So, after all of that history, all the pain and complexity, what are you left with? Let's take a look at the truly unique, multifaceted identity of the Bangking Hakka people as they are today.
What they've created is this fascinating hybrid culture. You can hear it in their dialect, which is Hakka sprinkled with Indonesian and Malay words. You can taste it in their food, which keeps traditional Hakka recipes but adds local spices. And maybe most amazing of all, you can see Buddhist temples, Christian churches, and Muslim mosques all standing peacefully, side by side on the same streets. And their identity is just as blended. Scholars sometimes describe it as 3 overlapping circles. You've got one circle for their deep ancestral roots. Another circle is how they adapt to different situations. And then there's this third thing. They've built themselves, this new identity, Bangka Hakka. So what this really means is they aren't just one thing. They hold all these identities at the same time. They're Bangka Hakka, they're Indonesian Chinese, and they're Indonesian. It's this really fluid, layered way of seeing themselves in the world. So when you step back and look at the whole story, from the brutal work in the tin mines all the way through a century of political storms, the spirit of this community has proven to be just unbreakable. And if you need one single, powerful symbol of that legacy, it's this. After decades of pressure to assimilate, over 1,000 Chinese temples are still standing on that island today. They're so much more than places to worship. They are monuments to a heritage that simply refused to be erased. But of course, the story isn't over, and there are still big challenges. A lot of the younger generation today don't speak the Hakka dialect anymore. They prefer to use Indonesian. And this leaves us with a final, really important question, not just for the people of Bangka, but for communities like theirs all over the world. When a language starts to fade away, how do you keep a culture alive?
感谢您今天的收听，也邀请大家订阅《客家家乐蜜》这个 podcast 节目，每天都要记得收听哦。